All right, so here's one of the problems from the miscellaneous unit test, one of the short answer problems. Now, what Ms. Muscarella is going to have you guys do is make sure you understand what is going on here. Now, the very first question, question A, asks for the slope of the tangent line at x equals 3 pi over 2. So all we need to do is evaluate the derivative at that x value. We don't need a point like we would if we were trying to find the equation of the tangent line. So the first thing you've got to be able to do is look up here at the given f of x, and they tell you there's your function. So you just simply have to apply the product rule for f of x equals e to the x cosine of x. That very first line is what is, I'll go ahead and erase all these pieces here. That very first part is just right there. There's your derivative for the given function. Now, the second thing that you've got to do is go ahead and evaluate that derivative at this x value. So anywhere there's an x in the original function, or in the derivative of the function, you're going to plug in 3 pi over 2. And so again, you've got to know your trig and you've got to know your unit circle to evaluate that. When you do that, you come up with the final value of e to the 3 pi over 2. Now let's go ahead and take a look at question B here. This one is a really interesting one because it's a lot of things going on here. Now, the first thing they tell you is let g be a differentiable function such that g of pi over 2 equals 0. Now, notice they're giving you that. They're telling you that piece of information, so that's going to be critical to what we need later. Now, they also tell us that the graph of g prime, the derivative of g, is shown below. So this piece right here, like that's also going to be used. Now, in the question, they're asking us very specifically, find the value of the limit of f of x over g of x as x approaches pi over 2. Now, when you first do that, your f of x function, okay, that was given above. So e to the x cos x, that's your f of x function. So that gets substituted in the numerator, and then g of x just gets substituted for the denominator. Well, there's nothing to substitute because they just give you g of x. They don't give us an actual equation for that. Now, this is where we actually take that first piece that they gave us as g of pi over 2. That part right here is going to go in when we plug in 0 for the bottom, that's going to be in the denominator. And then e to the x cosine x, when we evaluate that at pi over 2, we're going to get e to the pi over 2 and then times cosine of pi over 2. And you should know that the cosine of pi over 2 is just 0. So we end up with 0 over 0, which is an indeterminate form. So therefore, you have to apply L'Hopital's rule. L'Hopital's rule, just take the derivative of the numerator, derivative of the denominator. Then on the numerator, we have a function. So again, we just did this derivative for part A, so that should already be able to be cleaned up and put right in there. Now, the challenging piece is the g of x function. We don't have a derivative for it. We don't have a function for that. So you're going to simply take that and just do g prime of x. Now, g prime of x, so what we have to do next is now we're going to look at the graph. Now we're going to look at the graph. So over on the graph that they give us of g prime, our x value that we're approaching is pi over 2. So I've got it highlighted over here in blue. So you've got to go to pi over 2 on your graph, on your x-axis, and then see what y value that is, because that's all a derivative is. It's the what when we evaluate pi over 2, we want to see what the y value is, what the output is. So that y value has a value of 2. And then when we plug in pi over 2 to the numerator, now on Muskie's work, you can see where I factored out an e to the pi over 2, because here we have an e to the x and here the e to the x. So I just took that out. That way, the only thing I'd have to evaluate would be each individual trig function. When you do that, you end up with negative e to the pi over 2 over 2. So that is the value of the limit. Now, one thing I want you guys to really pay attention to is your notation here. In part A, notice in the part that's highlighted in yellow, it's f prime of x. Right below that, I have f prime of 3 pi over 2 because that's the x value that we're evaluating at. In part B, notice, let me get rid of some of this stuff because we got a lot of highlighting and everything going on here. In part B, when we took a look at this first piece right here, the limit of x going to pi over 2 of e to the x cos x over g of x, after I applied L'Hopital's rule, I still had this lim piece with it. So make sure your notation keeps that. Now, once we evaluate and we plug in pi over 2, that lim piece is no longer there. So we don't have that in the second line or this third line here underneath the lim as x approaches 2. So make sure your notation's good and you guys will be all good to go on this problem. All right, so hopefully that helps clarify any questions that you may have had with that. And again, got to know your simple product rules as well as the values around the unit circle. All right, that's it for this video. Hope you guys got something out of that, and I'll catch up with you later. Peace out.